This week in wrestling history, coming into this week, I knew of about three key events, really important events this week in history. Until I sat down to put all my notes together, I didn't realize how many things actually happened this week in history, and I try not to cover every little thing every week. But this week, it was unavoidable. I looked at the list and I said, man, I can't cut any of this stuff. There are just far too many things that are worth mentioning. And we're going to start all the way back 40 years ago on June 21st, 1981. Dusty Rhodes captured his second NWA World Heavyweight title, defeating Harley Race in 17 minutes at the Omni in Atlanta. This was the longest of Dusty's three title reigns at just 88 days, barely 3 months, before dropping the belt to Ric Flair, which would begin Flair's very first run with the championship. 35 years ago this week, on June 24th, 1986, came the Great Betrayal, as it is known in wrestling circles, after a win over King Kong Bundy and Big John Studd at the WWE Championship Wrestling taping in Poughkeepsie, New York. Mr. Wonderful Paul Orndorff, or as Hogan called him, Orndorff, turned on Hulk Hogan and attacked his partner. Maybe he turned on him because he couldn't say his fucking name right. Orndorff gave him a pile driver and aligned himself with the Heenan family, which began the most lucrative run of his career, working on top against Hogan, including the main event of the big event in Toronto in August that sold out with more than 60,000 fans. And then later on, a cage match for the championship on Saturday night's main event. There were rumors that Orndorff was the backup if Andre the Giant couldn't go at WrestleMania 3. They could have extended that feud out a little bit longer and paid things off with Hogan and Mr. Wonderful there at the Silver Dome, but that was not to be. I think the arm injury that Orndorff suffered came during that period where he was feuding with Hogan. I think it was an accident while he was working out at the gym, and because of the spot that he was in, he put off having it treated or letting it heal because he was probably making so much freaking money on top working with Hogan that he just felt like he couldn't take time off. Unfortunately for him, it turned out to not be a smart move on his part because the injury got progressively worse and the muscles on his, I think it was his right side of the body, began to atrophy. And come to think of it, it might have been a neck injury that led to the arm issue. But I know it affected his arm, and he was really never the same after that. 26 years ago this week, on June 25th, 1995. Oh boy. One of the worst WWE pay-per-views of all time took place in Philadelphia. The 1995 King of the Ring, which up to that point garnered the lowest buy rate in company history with only 150,000 homes paying to see this atrocity. The less said about this show, the better, so I'll make this brief. We had the best wrestler in the entire tournament, Shawn Michaels, get eliminated in the first round of the night after a time limit draw against Kama, and the worst wrestler in the tournament, Mabel, went on to win the entire thing. So that pretty much sums it up for you right there. Bret Hart beat Jerry Lawler in a Kiss My Foot match, the worst of all of the matches I've seen these two guys have, which saw Bret shove his bare foot into Lawler's mouth after it was over. And then he took Lawler's dirty foot, which he claimed on television he hadn't washed in weeks, and he shoved it into Lawler's own mouth. And then later in the show, they showed Lawler throwing up. He was brushing his teeth in the back and rinsing, and he was throwing up in the men's room. No doubt mirroring the reaction of the fans at home by the end of this pay-per-view. And in the main event, Diesel and Bam Bam Bigelow defeated Tatanka and Psycho Sid, representing the $1 Million Corporation. The two guards opening and closing the doors of the entranceway were a young Matt and Jeff Hardy, who would routinely do jobs on television at that time. Jeff was only 17 years old. That should be considered child abuse after watching this shit show. They went off the air 11 minutes early that night, and that still wasn't early enough. 25 years ago this week, on June 23rd, 1996, Austin 316 was born. You believe it's been 25 years? And it's still got to be the highest selling pro wrestling t-shirt of all time. Right? I mean, it's between that and the NWO shirt. I couldn't go anywhere back then wearing that Austin 316 shirt, which I still have. And it'd probably be too big on me now. That was during the phase where I used to buy extra large shirts for some reason. I don't know why. I definitely did not need an extra large. It looked like I could have slept in that thing. So I doubt it would fit me today either. But I would wear that shirt back then. I couldn't go anywhere without getting a reaction. I was crossing the street one day, a few blocks away from my house. I almost shit myself when a truck driver honked at me. He was parked at a red light. I was crossing the street, and the driver saw my shirt, and he honked. And I almost had a fucking heart attack. If you know those truck horns, they're loud. But when I looked up, the guy was shouting Austin 316 at me, had a big smile on his face. So back then, I knew if I just wanted to go out and be left alone, I would have to leave that shirt at home. Wear my, Bugle Boy shirt or some bullshit like that. The show in Milwaukee sold out 3 weeks in advance. It was the first time since debuting as a pay-per-view that they did not feature the full slate of 8 matches, 8 tournament matches that is, on the actual show. We got the semifinal and final matches only, which saw Steve Austin beat Wildman Mark Merrow. Merrow's boot caught Austin in the mouth on a near fall, and Austin had to get 16 stitches in his upper lip before his second match later in the show. Jake the Snake Roberts beat Vader by disqualification, who then did a number on Jake's ribs, giving him a storyline injury heading into the finals. Ultimate Warrior, his final WWE pay-per-view appearance, picked up a quick win over Jerry Lawler. Boy, Lawler sure does have a knack for having shitty King of the Ring matches, doesn't he? All right, that one in 94 with Piper, which sucked. The match with Bret in 95, which sucked. And this match wasn't much better. They couldn't do much. The Warrior was dealing with a shoulder injury. Let's be honest, even without the injury, it's not like Warrior was going to be doing much anyway in the ring at that point. Mankind beat The Undertaker as cleanly as anybody up to that point had ever beaten The Undertaker, even though there was an accidental earn shot by Paul Bearer. But he put him down with the mandible claw. Mick Foley is on the latest Broken Skull sessions with Steve Austin, and he singled out this match as a turning point in his career because he had only debuted a few months before this, the night after WrestleMania. This was his first big match in WWE, and he just assumed that he was going to be doing the job. You know, he was the latest guy for The Undertaker to feud with, and Undertaker was going to go over. So when Taker told him that he was going over, he was shocked. And he knew he was in for the biggest push of his life. But it was shocking to see The Undertaker lose that cleanly. Ahmed Johnson beat Goldust to win the Intercontinental title. The main thing I always remember from this match was right at the start, Ahmed does this running dive into the corner, out over the top rope onto Goldust, and him coming up a little short and landing right on top of his head, or nearly on top of his head. One of the scariest things I've ever seen. We see dives like that all the time now, but not back then. And you definitely didn't see it from a 250-pound man like Ahmed Johnson. And Austin pinned Jake Roberts with the stunner to win the King of the Ring tournament, a win that was originally meant for Hunter Hearst Helmsley. But the curtain call killed all of that. Helmsley ended up jobbing to Jake Roberts in a qualifying match and was not even on the pay-per-view, although he did beat Aldo Montoya in a dark match that night, so I guess that's something, right? He was in the ring with the guy that had the jockstrap over his face, right? Then came the iconic promo. Austin started healing on Jake Roberts, who was doing a religious gimmick at that time. He was born again. quoting Bible verses. He even named his new albino python Revelations. And from that came the words, "You sit there and you thump your Bible and you say your prayers and it didn't get you anywhere. Talk about your Psalms, talk about John 3:16. Austin 3:16 says, I just whipped your ass." And I would say at that point, a star was born, but people forget, Austin did not become this transcendent figure in wrestling because of this promo. You started to see Austin 3:16 signs popping up in the crowds, but Austin was still a mid-card player until the fall of '96. At SummerSlam, 2 months after this, he was wrestling Yokozuna on the pre-show. It really was the feud that he had with Bret Hart, feuding with a real main eventer, more than this promo that sent him on his way. And then it was the stuff with Mike Tyson and Vince McMahon that just put him over the top and launched him into the stratosphere. But a few years ago on Busted Open Radio, Austin said it was Michael Hayes, after he got all stitched up backstage, who told him that Jake Roberts had cut this religious-based promo on him during the show. And when he asked him, well, what did he say? That's when the Austin 3:16 line popped into his brain, and he also came up with the closing line, and that's the bottom line because Stone Cold said so. He came up with both of those lines on the fly, so that one promo gave him 2 iconic taglines. That one night at an event that he was never even supposed to win. The stars just happened to align for him, and the pieces all fell into place. And in the main event, Shawn Michaels retained his WWE Championship over the British Bulldog, with Mr. Perfect as the guest referee, handpicked by the Bulldog and Jim Cornette. He was stationed outside the ring with Earl Hebner inside. A much better match than the one they had the month prior at that Beware of Dog pay-per-view, when the power went out and they thought their match was not even airing due to the power outage, until midway through the match, Earl Hebner is like, we are back live. We're actually live right now. And then they were pissed because they were just going through the motions. So they had a much better match here. 20 years ago this week, on June 21st, 2001, the debut episode of WWE's new reality show, Tough Enough, premiered on MTV as the top-rated show on cable for the night. Al Snow, Taz, Tori, and Jacqueline served as the trainers for that first season. Maven and Nydia were the male and female winners for season 1. Maven, I still maintain, Maven had a good look. Maven had real potential. I think he could have been much bigger than what he turned out to be. But he will always live on in Royal Rumble history with that Undertaker elimination in 2002. One of the great Royal Rumble moments of all time. Chris Nowinski was a runner-up, Harvard Chris. He eventually landed a job in WWE. Then he suffered pretty severe concussion issues that ended his career. And later on, he co-founded the Concussion Legacy Foundation. Josh Lomberger, a.k.a. Josh Matthews, also went on to land a job in WWE. The best parts of that first season were Taz verbally roasting Daryl for being a lazy ass. Even during the reunion, they had a reunion special when the season was over. And I wish I could remember everything he said. He had this great line about, oh God, I don't remember what it was. It was something about like when you're dead and in a box or something, people aren't going to give a shit about you. He called him a bitch. I know that. He called Daryl a bitch. And then Daryl walked off crying. Poor Daryl didn't even know what he was getting himself into. But staying on Tough Enough here for a second. The 6th and final, as of this recording anyway, final season, most recent season of Tough Enough, which aired live from the Performance Center in Orlando, premiered 6 years ago this week. On June 23rd, 2015, Josh Brettel and Sarah Lee were the winners, each earning $250,000 contracts with WWE. Josh, who was given the name Bronson Matthews, got a ton of heat in the locker room when he tweeted several months later during an episode of Raw. He tweeted and referred to the Social Outcasts faction. Remember the Social Outcasts? Bo Dallas, Curtis Axel, Adam Rose, and Heath Slater. He referred to them in a hashtag as the Social Jobbers. That didn't go over too well with the WWE locker room. Cody Rhodes said that he was banned from the locker room and to enjoy dressing in the hall. Kevin Owens blocked him on Twitter. He never did make it to TV, and he was cut the following year, said to be more due to concussion issues than his ill-advised tweet. Sarah Lee also never made it to NXT television and was cut a year after her win. She's also married to Wesley Blake of the Forgotten Sons, who WWE apparently forgot until they didn't. Once they realized he was still employed, they released him just a few months ago. Other names from that last season who went on to receive WWE contracts include Chelsea Green, Mandy Rose, Sonya Deville, and the Velveteen Dream, Patrick Clark. We all know how that story turned out. The judges for Season 6 were Daniel Bryan, Hulk Hogan, and Paige. Hogan only lasted 5 episodes, though, because his sex tape and N-word scandal exploded a few weeks later, which resulted in WWE terminating him and replacing him in the judge's seat with The Miz. Also 20 years ago, on June 24th, 2001, Edge defeated Rhino and Kurt Angle to become the King of the Ring. The Undertaker beat the crap out of Diamond Dallas Page in, I can't even call it a match. It was a fight. And it did not end well for DDP, who got his ass kicked, tucked his tail, and eventually ran away through the crowd to escape. Kurt Angle and Shane McMahon had a hellacious street fight that was easily the best match on the show. Angle suffered a sprained tailbone, a concussion, needed 5 stitches above his right eye. The concussion actually came earlier in the night in a match with Christian because he was also in the King of the Ring tournament that night. So he was already concussed coming into this match, which is insane. And there's no way that Shane McMahon wasn't concussed here too. I mean, I don't remember them officially announcing that, but when Kurt Angle went to suplex him through that glass, because they had like these glass panels that were part of the set and the staging area. It was supposed to be sugar glass, but Angle claims the person in charge ended up getting a harder type of glass instead of the kind that breaks away easily. Yeah, it didn't break, and Shane landed right on top of his head on the concrete. You could hear the sickening thud of skull on concrete. No way he wasn't concussed. Vince McMahon once said he considered going out there and stopping the match, given all the abuse that his son was taking. And Booker T made his WWE debut, interfering in the triple threat main event with Steve Austin, Chris Jericho, and Chris Benoit, dumping Austin onto the announce desk, which led to Austin breaking 3 bones in his back. Not the thing that you want to do on your first night in, injuring the top star and the champion of the company. But accidents happen, and Austin didn't hold him responsible. But this is what led to Austin doing more comedy segments that summer with Kurt Angle and Vince McMahon, because he needed some time out of the ring. I mean, he wasn't totally out of the ring, but he didn't wrestle all that much, and a big part of why was because of the injury. Booker, by the way, was led to believe he broke Austin's hand, which Austin says was not true. It was his back. His hand was never broken. But Bruce Pritchard says that Vince McMahon told him to get Booker to carry Austin's bags. I guess as punishment for injuring Stone Cold, or a way for him to kind of, I don't know, pay it back to Austin. Even though Austin said to him when they spoke eventually, hey, it's no problem, don't worry about it. This is what Pritchard says that Vince McMahon said to him, and you can imagine how that went over. But as Pritchard tells it, on Booker, or said, when he was on Booker T's Heated Conversation show a few years ago. Hat tip to Wrestling Inc., by the way, for the transcription. This is Pritchard. I remember calling Booker late at night. I had gotten a call from our owner, Vincent Kennedy McMahon, who suggested I call Book to suggest to him that he should call Steve and make sure Steve is all right. And he should be at Steve's door to carry his bags the next day at the airport. And so I'm like, let me get this straight. You want a fat white guy to call the new black guy and ask him to meet the star white guy and carry his bags through the airport? Okay. So obviously that went over like a fart in church. I was straight up with Book and I just didn't pull any punches and I just told him how it was, man, and where it was coming from and why. And he said, okay, great, I ain't carrying nobody's bag. And he didn't, and I respect him for that. And he respects me for being the one to have made the call and do my job. Austin wasn't the only person banged up. Benoit came into this match with a bad neck injury, and he disappeared for over a year after undergoing surgery with Dr. Youngblood down in Texas, spinal fusion surgery. This was Benoit's last match until July of 2002.